The morning sun broke through the clouds over Grenada on October 25, 1983. Private Marcus Thompson checked his watch. 05:30 hours. He'd been in the Army for exactly 97 days. His mother's letter was still in his chest pocket, unopened since mail call the night before. Read it after, he'd told himself. After the mission. After this quick operation they said would be over by lunch. Nobody told him that 45 minutes could feel like a lifetime. Nobody told him that time could stop, reverse, and shatter into a million pieces when bullets start flying. The Rangers around him were checking their gear. Some were veterans. Most, like Marcus, had never fired a shot in anger. They'd trained for this moment at Fort Benning, running the same drills until their bodies moved without thinking. But training never prepared you for the smell of aviation fuel mixing with ocean salt. Training never prepared you for the weight of knowing that in minutes everything would change. 2 minutes, the jumpmaster's voice cut through the C-130's engine roar. Marcus touched the letter again. His mother always ended them the same way. Come home safe, baby. He wondered if she was awake right now, 2,000 miles away in Detroit, making coffee in her small kitchen, unaware her son was about to jump into a war that officially didn't exist yet. The green light flashed. Marcus jumped. For 37 seconds he was flying. The Caribbean stretched endless below, paradise turned battlefield. Then his boots hit sand and paradise vanished. The world exploded into chaos. Automatic fire erupted from the tree line. The soldier next to him, Rodriguez, they'd shared cigarettes just hours before, crumpled without a sound. Blood spread across white sand like spilled wine. Time fractured. What happened next would take 45 minutes on the official report. But for Marcus Thompson, 19 years old, those 45 minutes would replay for the next 40 years. They would wake him at night. They would find him in quiet moments. They would teach him that war isn't measured in days or months or years. War is measured in heartbeats. October 1983. America was watching MTV. Kids were moonwalking to Michael Jackson. The Cold War simmered in headlines nobody really read anymore. And on a tiny Caribbean island most Americans couldn't find on a map, Cuban workers were extending an airport runway. That's how wars begin sometimes, not with grand declarations or armies massing at borders, but with concrete and blueprints and the slow creep of influence that suddenly, one Tuesday morning, becomes intolerable. Reagan called it a rescue mission. 600 American medical students needed evacuating. The Cubans called it an invasion. The Grenadians called it liberation. Marcus Thompson didn't call it anything. He was too busy trying to remember how to breathe with bullets snapping past his ear. The plan was surgical. Get in, secure the airfield, protect the students, restore order, quick and clean. American military might project it with precision. The 1st and 2nd Ranger battalions would drop at Point Saline's airfield at dawn. The 82nd Airborne would follow. Navy SEALs would take the governor's mansion. Marines would secure the north. By sunset, the Cuban and Grenadian forces would surrender. The medical students would be home for dinner. The world would barely notice. That was the plan. But plans die first in war. They die when intelligence reports miss the Cuban combat engineers dug into the hills. They die when radio frequencies get jammed and units can't talk to each other. They die when a 19-year-old private from Detroit realizes that the enemy shooting at him is another 19-year-old who also has a mother waiting at home. The runway at Point Saline's was supposed to be clear. Intel said maybe a few dozen Cubans with small arms. What Marcus saw through the smoke was different. Fortified positions, anti-aircraft guns depressed for ground fire, professional soldiers who knew how to fight. The Paradise Island had become a furnace, and they jumped straight into the flames. Contact left, someone screamed. Marcus swung his M16 and fired. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. He'd fired thousands of rounds in training. This was different. These bullets were meant to kill. Each trigger pull was a decision. Each decision echoed into eternity. Somewhere in those first moments between the jumping and the landing and the shooting, the boy from Detroit disappeared. What remained was something harder, something that would carry scars invisible to everyone but him. The medical students they'd come to save were 3 miles away, locked in their dorms, watching the war come to them through their windows. They could hear the fighting but didn't understand it. How could they? Yesterday they were studying anatomy. Today, anatomy was being rewritten in real time on the airfield where young men were learning that the human body contains approximately 5 liters of blood, and all of it looks the same on foreign sand. Marcus pressed himself against a concrete barrier. His ears rang from the constant gunfire. Smoke drifted across the airfield like morning fog, but this fog stung your eyes and tasted like copper. 10 feet away, Sergeant Mitchell was on the radio, trying to raise anyone at all. The plan had called for coordinated movements, multiple units hitting multiple objectives simultaneously, but the radios were ghosts, spitting static and silence. Thompson, Martinez, Crawford, Mitchell pointed at a building 50 meters away. We need to clear that structure. Move. They moved. In training, 50 meters was nothing. Here, it was an eternity. Each step exposed them to intersecting fields of fire. The Cubans knew their business. They'd turned the airport into a killing field, every approach covered, every angle calculated. Marcus ran bent low, feeling the air crack around him as rounds passed close, too close. His world shrank to the next piece of cover, the next breath, the next heartbeat. They reached the building. Martinez, a kid from San Antonio who'd joined for college money, stacked up on the door. His hands shook as he gripped his rifle. They all shook. Fear is honest that way. It doesn't care about your training or your pride or the flag on your shoulder. Fear just is. And in those moments, courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is Martinez kicking in that door anyway. The room exploded in gunfire. A Cuban soldier, young as them, eyes wide with the same terror, fired wildly. Marcus shot him, center mass, like they'd taught him. The Cuban fell, tried to rise, fell again. His rifle clattered across the floor. He was saying something in Spanish, calling for his mother maybe, or praying, or cursing them. Marcus would never know. The Cuban's eyes found his for a moment. Just a moment. Before the light left them. First kill. They don't give you a medal for that. They don't even talk about it. But it changes you. Fundamentally. Irrevocably. 1 second a human being exists, with dreams and fears and someone who loves them. The next second, they don't. And you did that. You made that choice. That transition. That ending. Marcus stared at the body. Martinez was shouting something. Crawford was checking the other rooms. But Marcus just stared, understanding for the first time what war actually cost. Thompson, snap out of it, Mitchell's voice cut through. We've got more buildings to clear. More buildings. More rooms. More choices. The 45 minutes stretched like taffy, each second pregnant with potential death. They cleared structure after structure. Some empty, some not. Each door they kicked might be their last. Each corner they turned might hide the bullet with their name on it. This wasn't heroism. This was survival dressed in duty's uniform. Outside, the battle raged. Other units were pinned down near the runway. The Cubans had a bulldozer, and they'd blocked the landing strip. The follow-on forces couldn't land. What should have been an overwhelming assault became a desperate fight for every inch of concrete. Marcus could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixing with the sharp bark of American M16s. Somewhere, a man screamed for a medic. The scream went on until suddenly it didn't. The sun climbed higher, turning the Caribbean heat into a weapon. Sweat poured down Marcus's face, stinging his eyes, soaking his uniform. They'd secured their section of the airport, but the fighting continued all around them. Radio communications were still spotty. Nobody knew the complete picture. Were the SEALs successful at the governor's mansion? Had the Marines landed in the north? Were the medical students safe? In war, ignorance and chaos are constant companions. Water! Crawford gasped, slumping against a wall. They'd been moving and fighting for what felt like hours but had only been minutes. Time had become elastic, meaningless. Crawford's canteen was empty. They all were. In the rush to combat, nobody had thought about water. Such a simple thing. Such a deadly oversight. Men can fight without food. They can fight without sleep. But in the Caribbean heat, without water, they become casualties without ever seeing the enemy. Marcus shared his last mouthful with Crawford. The warm water tasted like plastic and life itself. Around them, the battle's rhythm had changed. The initial fury had settled into something more deliberate, probing fires, careful movements. Both sides learning the other's positions, strengths, weaknesses. The Cubans were good, better than anyone had expected. These weren't conscripts or advisors. These were combat engineers, trained soldiers who dug in and intended to stay. An explosion shook the ground. Someone had called in air support. A-7 Corsairs screamed overhead, dropping ordnance danger close to American positions. The bombs walked across the Cuban strongpoints like giant footsteps. The ground jumped. Windows shattered. Men on both sides pressed themselves flat and prayed to whatever gods they knew. When the smoke cleared, the firing resumed, quieter now. Some positions silenced forever, others still defiant. Movement. Martinez pointed toward the tree line. Figures darted between the palms. Friendly or enemy? At 200 meters, everyone looks the same. Rules of engagement said positive identification before firing. But positive identification might come in the form of muzzle flashes aimed at you. Marcus sighted on the lead figure. His finger found the trigger. Waited. The figure emerged from the shadows. American. 82nd Airborne. The follow-on forces had finally arrived. Relief flooded through Marcus like cool water. Reinforcements meant the tide would turn. Fresh troops, more firepower, better communications. The Rangers had held the door open. Now the rest of the army would pour through. But even as he felt relief, Marcus couldn't shake the image of the Cuban soldier he'd killed. Did that man feel relief when he woke up this morning, not knowing it was his last? Did he write letters home that would never be answered? The airborne paratroopers moved past them, heading for objectives further inland. One of them, a sergeant old enough to be Marcus's father, paused. His uniform showed the wear of someone who'd been to war before. Vietnam, probably. His eyes took in the Rangers, blood on their uniforms, 1,000-yard stares already forming, boys transformed into something else in just minutes of combat. First time? The sergeant asked quietly. Marcus nodded. It doesn't get easier, the sergeant said. You just get better at carrying it. Then he was gone, leading his men toward the sounds of gunfire. Marcus watched them go, wondering what ghost that sergeant carried, wondering what ghost he'd carry. The letter in his pocket felt heavier now. His mother's words, "Come home safe, baby," seemed to come from another world. A world where sons didn't kill other mothers' sons before breakfast. By 0700 hours, the airport was mostly secure. Mostly. That word carried weight in combat. Mostly meant snipers might still lurk in the terminal. Mostly meant unexploded ordnance could be buried in the sand. Mostly meant you couldn't relax, couldn't let your guard down, couldn't stop watching the windows and doorways and shadows that might hide death. The medical students were still 3 miles away at the True Blue campus. Between the Rangers and those students lay an unknown number of Cuban and Grenadian forces. The clock was ticking. Washington wanted those students safe. The media was already asking questions. This had to end quickly and successfully, or questions would become investigations, and investigations would become political catastrophe. Marcus's squad was ordered to hold their position while other units pushed toward the campus. Holding meant waiting, and waiting, Marcus discovered, was its own kind of torture. During the fighting, adrenaline carried you. Training took over. Your body moved without conscious thought. But in the waiting, your mind caught up. The shakes started. Not from fear, but from adrenaline leaving your system like tide going out. Your body remembered it was made of flesh, not steel. Your mind remembered that flesh, tears, bleeds, dies. They set up in a building overlooking the runway. Windows gave them good fields of fire. Concrete walls offered protection. It should have felt safe. It didn't. Safety was an illusion now, a luxury left behind when they jumped from that C-130. Martinez was on watch. Crawford tried to sleep, but his eyes kept snapping open at every sound. Mitchell cleaned his rifle for the 3rd time, the repetitive motion a meditation against chaos. Marcus pulled out his mother's letter. His hands trembled as he opened it. Her handwriting, careful and clear, seemed alien in this place of violence. She wrote about the neighborhood, about Mrs. Jackson's new grandchild, about the church fundraiser next month. Normal things. Life things. Things that continued half a world away while he sat in a building that smelled of cordite and fear, with a dead man's blood on his boots. "Dear baby," the letter began. She always called him baby, even though he towered over her now. "I hope this letter finds you well and strong. I pray for you every night. He couldn't finish. The words blurred, not from tears. He was too dehydrated to cry. They blurred because they came from a world he wasn't sure he could return to. How could he sit at her kitchen table and talk about Mrs. Jackson's grandchild when he'd just taken someone else's grandchild away forever? How could he pray in church when his prayers now were just, "Please don't let me die," repeated like a mantra? Gunfire erupted somewhere to the east. Not close, but not far enough. The radio crackled with reports. Another unit in contact. Casualties. The medical students were secure. Most of them. Some had scattered to other locations. The hunt continued. The simple rescue mission had become a complex operation spanning the entire island. What intelligence had missed wasn't just the number of Cubans. It was the reality that wars, even small ones, have a momentum of their own. They grow. They spread. They consume. "You okay?" Mitchell asked, nodding at the letter. Marcus folded it carefully, returned it to his pocket. "Yeah, Sarge, I'm good." It was the first lie he'd tell about the war. It wouldn't be the last. Because how do you explain that okay had been redefined? That good now meant alive and functional? That your baseline for normal had shifted so fundamentally that you couldn't imagine returning to a world where the biggest worry was being late for work? The call came at 0745. Move out. Push toward the medical campus. Support the 82nd Airborne in securing the remaining students. The 45-minute war was supposed to be over, but wars don't follow schedules. They follow their own logic, their own terrible momentum. Marcus's squad joined a larger force moving east along the coast road. The Paradise Island revealed itself in the growing light. Pristine beaches, swaying palms, crystal clear water that should have been full of tourists instead of landing craft. But Paradise had teeth. The Cubans and Grenadians had fallen back but hadn't broken. They conducted a fighting withdrawal, making the Americans pay for every mile. Roadblocks appeared at choke points. Snipers fired from buildings, then vanished. Mortar rounds dropped without warning, forcing everyone to dive for cover. This wasn't the stand-up fight at the airport. This was something more frustrating, more nerve-wracking. Death could come from any direction at any moment. They reached a small village. Civilians peeked from windows and doorways, caught between armies, unsure which side meant safety. An old woman stood in her garden, watching the American soldiers pass. Her face was unreadable. Liberation or occupation? The difference often depends on which end of the rifle you're facing. Marcus wanted to tell her they were there to help, that they meant no harm to civilians. But his Spanish was limited to what he'd learned in high school, and somehow, "Donde está la biblioteca?" didn't seem appropriate. A child ran across the street, maybe 6 years old. Boy or girl, Marcus couldn't tell. Just a flash of movement that made everyone raise their weapons, fingers finding triggers, death a reflex away from delivery. The child disappeared into a house. Everyone breathed again. This was the reality of urban combat. Every movement might be a threat. Every corner might hide an enemy. Every second required decisions that could end innocent lives. Contact right. The ambush came from a school. A school. The Cubans had positioned themselves perfectly, catching the American column in a crossfire. Marcus dove behind a low wall as bullets chewed the air above him. The distinctive crack, crack, crack of AK fire mixed with the whoosh of RPGs. A vehicle exploded. Men screamed. The organized column became chaos in seconds. Training took over again. Return fire. Fire and movement. One team shoots while another advances. Basic tactics made complicated by the reality that the enemy was shooting back with skill and determination. The school windows sparkled with muzzle flashes. Somewhere, a machine gun opened up, its deeper voice dominating the firefight. Marcus fired at windows, at doorways, at shadows that might or might not hide enemies. His rifle magazine emptied. He reloaded without thinking, muscle memory faster than conscious thought. "Frag out!" Someone threw a grenade. The explosion blew out windows, silenced one firing position. But others continued. This wasn't like the airport where they could call in airstrikes. Too many civilians nearby, too many chances for what the officers called collateral damage, and everyone else called dead innocents. This had to be done the hard way, building by building, room by room, life by life. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. Time meant nothing in combat. When the firing stopped, 3 Americans were wounded, 1 seriously. The medics worked frantically, trying to stop bleeding that wouldn't stop. The Cubans had withdrawn again, leaving only spent brass and blood to mark their positions. How many had they killed? How many had escaped? Nobody knew. Nobody had time to care. The wounded needed evacuation. The mission continued. Marcus watched the seriously wounded soldier get loaded onto a vehicle. A kid from somewhere in the Midwest, his face pale from blood loss, eyes staring at nothing. Would he make it? Would he go home to his family whole or broken or at all? These questions had no answers. Only time would tell, and time was a luxury they didn't have. They reached the True Blue campus by Oro 900. The medical students were there, huddled in dormitories, frightened but unharmed. Most of them. Reports were confused. Some students might be at another campus, some might have fled to the hills. Nobody was sure of numbers or locations. The fog of war was thick, and in that fog, mistakes multiplied. But for now, these students were safe. American forces had reached them. The primary mission was accomplished. Except it wasn't. Not really. Because missions in war expand like ripples in water. Secure the students became secure the campus. Secure the campus became secure the surrounding area. Secure the area became hunt down the remaining resistance. What started as a rescue became an occupation, however brief. And Marcus, who'd thought he'd be home by Christmas, began to understand that war's end is never as clear as its beginning. The students were a strange sight. Young Americans in shorts and t-shirts, medical textbooks still open on their desks. As out of place in this violence as flowers in a slaughterhouse, they peppered the soldiers with questions. When could they leave? Were their friends at the other campus safe? Could they call home? One girl, maybe 22, from California by her accent, approached Marcus. "Did you kill anyone?" she asked. Not accusingly, just curious. The way someone might ask about a movie they hadn't seen. Marcus stared at her. How could he answer that? Yes, he'd killed. He'd killed a Cuban soldier who was probably younger than this medical student. He'd killed others too, probably, in the confused firefights where you shot at muzzle flashes and movement. But how do you explain that to someone whose biggest worry yesterday was passing anatomy class? "We did our job," he said finally. She nodded as if this explained everything and walked away. Marcus envied her ability to walk away. He was learning that some things you carry forever and the weight only gets heavier with time. The other Rangers were setting up security positions around the campus. The fighting wasn't over. Somewhere on this island, Cuban and Grenadian forces were regrouping, planning, preparing to strike back. The students might be secured, but the war continued. Mitchell found him staring at nothing. "Take 5, Thompson. Get some water. Eat something. Water. Food. Basic human needs that seemed absurd in this situation." But Mitchell was right. The human body needed fuel, even when the human mind was overwhelmed. Marcus found an MRE in his pack. Beef stew, according to the label. It tasted like salted cardboard, but he ate it anyway. Nearby, Martinez was writing in a small notebook. Letters home, maybe, or just trying to make sense of the senseless. "What do you think happens after this?" Martinez asked. "We go home," Marcus said. "No, I mean after, when we're old. Do you think we'll remember this?" Marcus thought about the Cuban soldier's eyes, the way life left them, the weight of the letter in his pocket, the sound of bullets passing close enough to feel. "Yeah," he said, "we'll remember." He was right. 40 years later, he still remembered. Every detail, every sound, every smell, every face. Memory was the price of survival, paid in nightly installments for the rest of your life. By afternoon, the island had become a chessboard of American forces. Marines in the north, airborne in the center, Rangers holding key positions. The enemy had fragmented into small groups, some fighting, some fleeing, some surrendering. The Governor General had been rescued. Most of the medical students were accounted for. In Washington, they were already calling it a success. On the ground, it felt like anything but. The heat was brutal now. October in the Caribbean was supposed to be pleasant. Nobody told the sun that there was a war on. It beat down mercilessly, turning uniforms into salt-stained rags, making weapons almost too hot to hold. Dehydration was becoming a real enemy. More Rangers were falling out from heat exhaustion than from enemy fire. The human body, Marcus learned, had limits. Push past them, and you became a casualty without ever seeing combat. Word came down, prepare for counterattack. Intelligence suggested the Cubans were massing for a final push, maybe to break out, maybe to inflict maximum casualties before surrendering, maybe just to die fighting rather than give up. The Rangers dug in, improved their positions, checked and rechecked their ammunition. The waiting began again, waiting for an attack that might come, waiting for orders that might change, waiting for a war that was supposed to be over to finally end. In the lull, stories filtered through. A SEAL team had lost men in a botched insertion. Helicopters had been shot down, friendly fire incidents, civilians caught in crossfire. The clean surgical operation was anything but. It was messy and chaotic and tragic in ways the planners never anticipated. Because war planning was done on maps and charts with pins and symbols. War fighting was done in heat and fear, with blood and bullets. Marcus found himself thinking about the Cuban soldiers. Who were they? Engineers, they said. Men who came to build an airport. Did they volunteer for this? Did they wake up that morning knowing they'd fight Americans? Did they have letters from mothers in their pockets too? The enemy, he was learning, was never what you expected. They weren't monsters or faceless villains. They were young men, far from home, fighting for reasons that probably made sense to someone somewhere. Thompson. Mitchell appeared with new orders. We're moving out. One more objective. Ammunition depot, 2 clicks north, supposed to be lightly defended. Supposed to be. Those words had lost all meaning. The airport was supposed to be lightly defended. The whole operation was supposed to be easy. But supposed to be was a luxury for planners and politicians. For soldiers, there was only what was. And what was rarely matched what was supposed to be. They moved out as the sun began its descent toward the Caribbean. 2 kilometers wasn't far, unless you were carrying full combat load in tropical heat, unless every step might trigger an ambush. Unless you'd been fighting since dawn and your body was running on adrenaline fumes and stubbornness. The squad moved in tactical formation, spread out, watching every approach. The jungle pressed close on both sides of the dirt road. Perfect ambush terrain, but no ambush came. They reached the depot to find it abandoned. The Cubans had pulled out, leaving behind crates of ammunition and equipment. No fight, no resistance, just empty buildings and the ghost of what might have been. It felt wrong somehow, anticlimactic. After all the violence, all the death, to find nothing but shadows and silence. Secure the perimeter, Mitchell ordered. Demo teams coming to blow this place. They set up positions and waited, always waiting. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that reminded Marcus of muzzle flashes. Soon, it would be dark. Night fighting was a different animal. Everything became shadows and sounds. Friend and foe looked identical in the darkness. Fear multiplied when you couldn't see what was hunting you. The demolition team arrived as darkness fell. Engineers like the Cubans they'd been fighting. But these engineers came to destroy, not build. They placed charges with practiced efficiency, turning the ammunition depot into a giant bomb waiting for the signal. The Rangers pulled back to safe distance. When it blew, the explosion lit up the night like false dawn. The shockwave rolled over them, a physical thing that pressed against chest and eardrums. The depot disappeared in fire and thunder. That's how you do it, someone said. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was thinking about explosions and violence and how easy it was to destroy what others had built. The depot had been someone's work, someone's purpose. Now it was smoke and rubble. Just like the bodies at the airport, just like the plans that had died in first contact. Destruction was always easier than creation. New orders came over the radio. The operation was winding down. Cuban resistance was crumbling. Negotiations had begun. The medical students were being evacuated. The Rangers were to hold position overnight, then prepare for extraction. The 45-minute war had stretched into hours, would stretch into days, but the end was in sight. They'd won, whatever that meant. The squad set up a defensive position for the night. 2-hour watches, half alert, half resting, though rest was a joke. How do you sleep when your nerves are shot with adrenaline, when every sound might be enemy movement? When closing your eyes meant seeing faces of men you'd killed, Marcus took first watch, staring into darkness that seemed alive with possibility. The jungle sounds were different here. Not like the training areas at Fort Benning. These insects sang different songs. These birds called different warnings. Or maybe it was just him that was different. Maybe the jungle was the same everywhere, and it was the listener who changed. He thought about home. Detroit would be cooling down now. October meant jackets and falling leaves. His mother would be watching the evening news, looking for word of her son. Can't sleep either? Crawford appeared beside him, moving quiet like they'd taught them. Just thinking. Don't, Crawford said. Thinking's dangerous in places like this. But how do you not think? How do you not process what you've seen and done? How do you not wonder about the randomness of who lived and who died? Rodriguez was dead. He'd been standing right next to Marcus when they landed. One step different. 1 second earlier or later, and it might have been Marcus with a bullet in his skull. That randomness was perhaps the hardest thing to accept. There was no logic to survival. No reward for being good or smart or brave. Just luck. Blind, stupid luck. The night passed slowly. Each minute dragged. Every shadow could hide danger. Every sound could herald attack, but nothing came. The Cubans were done fighting. The war was over except for the paperwork. When dawn finally broke, painting the jungle in soft greens and golds, Marcus realized he'd survived. The 45-minute war that had lasted all day was ending. He was going home. But which version of him was going home? Not the boy who jumped from that plane yesterday morning. That person was gone, left somewhere between the airport and here. The person going home was older, harder, marked by invisible scars that would never fully heal. War did that. It took who you were and returned something else, something that looked the same but wasn't. Something that could smile and laugh and pretend to be normal while carrying ghosts that never sleep. They flew out that afternoon. The same type of C-130 that had brought them delivered them to Barbados, then home. The medical students were already gone, whisked away to safety in CNN interviews. They'd talk about their ordeal, their fear, their gratitude to the brave soldiers who rescued them. They'd become minor celebrities for a few days. Then life would move on. They'd finish medical school, become doctors, save lives instead of taking them. The Rangers sat in the cargo hold silent. What was there to say? They'd done their job. The mission was successful. Democracy was safe. The Cubans were expelled. The students were rescued. In the history books, it would be clean and simple. Operation Urgent Fury, a model of American military intervention. Quick, decisive, effective. The books wouldn't mention Rodriguez's blood on the sand. They wouldn't mention the Cuban soldier calling for his mother. They wouldn't mention the weight that settled in your chest and never quite lifted. Marcus felt the letter in his pocket. Still there. Still unread beyond those first lines. He pulled it out, smoothed the creases and finished reading. His mother wrote about ordinary things. Beautiful, ordinary things. The new family that moved in down the street, the church choir preparing for Christmas. Her tomato plants finally producing fruit. Life continuing in all its mundane glory while her son had been killing and trying not to be killed. I know you can't tell me what you're doing, she wrote near the end, but whatever it is, remember that you're my baby. Remember that you're loved. Remember that home is waiting for you no matter what. No matter what. Those 3 words carried more weight now. Because what included things his mother could never imagine. What included taking lives. What included watching friends die. What included learning that you were capable of violence that surprised even you. But she was right. Home was waiting. A home that would never quite fit the same way again. The plane lifted off from Barbados. Below, the Caribbean sparkled innocent blue, as if the last 2 days hadn't happened, as if young men hadn't bled into its sand, as if war hadn't touched its shores. From altitude, everything looked peaceful, clean, simple. That was the lie of distance. Get far enough away from anything and it loses its rough edges, its complexity, its cost in human terms. They landed at Fort Benning to a hero's welcome. Bands playing, families waiting, generals making speeches about duty and honor and victory. Marcus stood in formation listening to words that seemed to come from another language. They'd left 2 days ago as Rangers. They returned as combat veterans. The transformation was complete, irreversible and mostly invisible to everyone who hadn't been there. His mother was in the crowd, smaller than he remembered, grayer too. Had that happened in 2 days, or had he just not noticed before? She waved when she saw him. That same wave she'd given when he left for basic training. But her eyes were different. Mothers know. Somehow they always know when their children have been touched by darkness. When he finally reached her, she didn't ask questions. Just held him tight and whispered, "You're home, baby. You're home." He was home. But Grenada came with him. It lived in his dreams where Rodriguez still crumpled on the sand. It lived in his reflexes where sudden noises made him reach for a rifle that wasn't there. It lived in quiet moments when his mind would drift back to those 45 minutes that had lasted forever. The war was over. The healing had just begun, and Marcus Thompson, who'd left Detroit as a boy, began the long journey of learning to live with the man he'd become. The 45-minute war was history now. A footnote in the Cold War, a brief military action that most Americans would forget by Christmas. But for those who were there, for those who'd jumped into paradise and found hell, it would never end. Not really. Because wars don't end when the shooting stops. They end when the last veteran stops waking up at night, heart pounding, reaching for a weapon to fight ghosts that bullets can't kill. They end when the last mother stops crying for a son who came home different, or didn't come home at all. Like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. This channel is for those who believe history is made not only by armies, but by individual courage. Tell us your stories. Tell us about the veterans in your family. Tell us about the 45-minute wars that lasted lifetimes. Because every soldier's story deserves to be heard. Every sacrifice deserves to be remembered. Every Marcus Thompson who jumped into hell and somehow found his way home deserves to know that we see them, we honor them,